Picture the most dangerous game of hide-and-seek ever played. Now, remove the game part, remove the fun part, remove the option of simply getting bored and going home for lunch. What's left is survival. Not survival on a deserted island with a volleyball for company. Not survival in the wilderness with a Swiss Army knife and misplaced optimism. Survival inside a modern industrial society that had turned its entire bureaucratic machinery, trains, records, police, checkpoints, filing systems, and an absolutely terrifying enthusiasm for paperwork directly against you. The Nazis didn't just want to persecute people, they wanted to organize the persecution. They filed documents about the documents. They created departments to oversee the departments. If the Third Reich had directed that same administrative energy toward literally anything else, they'd have had the most efficiently run postal service in human history. Instead, they built a machine specifically designed to make escape impossible, and people escaped anyway. Not everyone. The losses were catastrophic, and the grief is permanent, and nothing in this story minimizes that. 6 million people were murdered. Entire communities, entire languages, entire worlds gone. But some survived. Hundreds of thousands survived, and the methods they used to do it represent some of the most creative, nerve-shredding, borderline absurd problem-solving in recorded human history. This is that story. Becoming someone else entirely and never slipping up. The single most common survival tool was a lie. Not a small, polite, socially convenient lie. A total, complete, all-consuming, years-long performance of being an entirely different human being. Thousands of Jews survived by obtaining false papers and simply becoming someone else. New name, new birthday, new hometown, new family history, new religion, new everything. You were David your entire life. Tomorrow you wake up as Daniel. Daniel has different parents, different memories, different prayers he knows by heart, a different way of pronouncing certain words, a different church he attended every Sunday in a town he has actually never visited. From this morning forward, remembering your real identity could get you killed. Forgetting your fake one could also get you killed. The margin for error was, to put it gently, slim. This sounds manageable until you realize what it actually involves. Fake identities are exactly like lies. One lie is easy. One lie you can maintain forever. 1,000 interlocking lies require a memory like a steel trap and nerves like industrial cabling. Where were you born? Quick, don't hesitate. Who were your parents? Say it naturally. What church did you attend? Name it. Name the priest. Name 3 families who sat near you. Why do you pause before answering? Why does your accent shift on certain words? Why do you look slightly to the left before responding? One wrong answer. One moment of hesitation at the wrong checkpoint with the wrong officer on the wrong afternoon. That was frequently enough. And yet, people did this. For months. For years. They memorized entire fictional biographies and performed them daily under conditions of almost incomprehensible stress. Today, we cannot remember our Netflix password. These people memorized fake childhoods while being actively hunted. The forged documents that made this possible came from underground networks of forgers operating at considerable personal risk. False identity cards, fake work permits, counterfeit certificates of baptism. Tiny pieces of paper that sometimes meant the difference between everything and nothing. There are people alive today, grandparents, great-grandparents, who lived the first years of their lives under a name that wasn't theirs, in a neighborhood that wasn't theirs, praying in a language they learned specifically to not get caught. The audacity required to pull that off, daily, indefinitely, is difficult to fully comprehend from the comfortable distance of the present. Hiding in spaces that technically weren't big enough. When becoming someone else wasn't possible, some people simply disappeared. Literally. Attics, basements, barns, false walls, hidden rooms behind bookshelves, secret compartments under floorboards. Spaces so small that a modern walk-in closet would feel like a luxury penthouse by comparison. Anne Frank and 7 others hid in a concealed annex behind a rotating bookcase in Amsterdam for 25 months. 8 people, a concealed apartment, forced to remain completely silent during working hours while strangers went about their business just meters away. No running, no raised voices, no flushing the toilet at the wrong time, no music, no spontaneous laughter, no going outside for 2 years. If you've ever tried to stay quiet during a film your partner chose and you hate, that's approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes, and it's already nearly impossible. These people did it for over 700 days. The Frank family were ultimately discovered, and Anne did not survive. But their story represents thousands of similar situations across occupied Europe, most of which ended differently. Roughly 25,000 Jews hid successfully in the Netherlands alone, sheltered by Dutch civilians who did so at enormous personal risk. Getting caught hiding a Jewish family wasn't a fine, wasn't community service, wasn't a strongly worded letter. It was a death sentence, for everyone, including the helpers. And people did it anyway. Tens of thousands of people across occupied Europe looked at what was happening, looked at the risk, looked at their own families and said, "Not in my house. Not on my watch. Come in, the barn is unlocked, dinner is at 7. Try not to make noise after 9. History tends to focus on the monsters. There were plenty, but there were also farmers, priests, nuns, teachers, shopkeepers, ordinary citizens who hid people under their floorboards for years and asked for nothing except that everyone please keep it down on Tuesday mornings when the German officer comes to collect rent. The forest option, rough but available. For those who couldn't hide inside cities, there was always the forest, which is exactly as comfortable as it sounds. Jewish partisan groups formed throughout Eastern Europe, particularly in the dense forests of Poland, Belarus, and Lithuania. These were not professional soldiers. These were accountants, students, butchers, teenagers who had been, until very recently, worrying about entirely normal teenage things. Now they were living in the woods, eating whatever was available, sabotaging rail lines, cutting Nazi supply routes, occasionally blowing things up. The Bielski partisans are the most famous example, largely because their story is extraordinary enough to seem fictional, even though it isn't. 3 brothers, Tuvia, Asael, and Zeus Bielski, escaped into the Naliboki forest in Belarus and built what became a functioning community in the middle of the wilderness. Workshops, a school, a mill, a bakery, a court system for resolving disputes, because even while being hunted in a forest, humans apparently cannot stop arguing and need somewhere official to take their grievances. At its peak, over 1,200 people were living there. Men, women, children, elderly, people who could fight, and people who absolutely could not. Tuvia Bielski's rule was simple. Nobody gets left behind. Not the elderly, not the children, not the sick. Nobody. From a purely military efficiency standpoint, this was inconvenient. From a moral standpoint, it was everything. The Nazis sent multiple armed expeditions into that forest specifically to destroy them. All of them failed. Over 1,200 people emerged from those woods alive at the end of the war because 3 brothers decided that the forest, uncomfortable as it was, beat the alternative, and they'd figure out the logistics as they went. The diplomats who just started signing things. Some people survived because of individuals who looked at their official orders, considered the situation carefully, and decided that their orders were wrong. Chiune Sugihara was a Japanese diplomat stationed in Kaunas, Lithuania in 1940. Thousands of Jewish refugees appeared outside his consulate requesting transit visas to Japan, visas that might allow them to escape through the Soviet Union and eventually reach safety. His government said no. He requested permission again. No. He requested a third time. Still, no. So Chiuna Sugihara sat down at his desk and started writing visas anyway. By hand. For weeks. He wrote so many visas his hand cramped, and he kept writing. He continued after being ordered to leave Lithuania. He was reportedly still passing visas through his train window as it pulled out of the station, handing them to people running alongside the tracks. He is estimated to have saved somewhere between 2,000 and 6,000 lives. When asked why he did it, his answer was not dramatic. He didn't describe a moment of cinematic moral revelation. He said, essentially, that he couldn't watch people die when he had the capacity to help. A man with a pen, a cramping hand, and a conscience that outweighed his job description. Then there was Oskar Schindler, a German businessman, a Nazi party member, a man who by every pre-war indication was not on track to become anyone's idea of a moral hero. He ran a factory in Krakow using Jewish labor, and somewhere along the way started spending his own money, enormous amounts of it, bribing Nazi officials to keep his workers off deportation lists. He kept finding new workers to add to his factory roster. He kept declaring more people essential. He spent so much on bribes and schemes that by the end of the war, he had essentially no personal fortune remaining. He saved approximately 1,200 lives. He died relatively poor and was buried in Jerusalem, which is statistically not the most common final destination for German industrialists from the 1940s. Surviving inside the camps. Some people couldn't escape, couldn't hide, couldn't flee. They ended up in the camps themselves, and some of them survived that too, which required a form of daily, grinding, exhausting ingenuity that almost defies description. Survival inside a concentration camp depended on reading situations with preternatural accuracy, knowing which guard was having a bad day and should be avoided entirely, which skill might make you temporarily indispensable, which small act of positioning or timing might mean the difference between a better or worse assignment. People claimed skills they didn't have and learned them frantically. A man who had never fixed machinery in his life declared himself a mechanic. He figured it out fast. He survived. People bartered with scraps, traded information, shared intelligence about which commandos had slightly better conditions, maintained networks of mutual aid inside a system specifically designed to eliminate mutual aid by making survival feel like competition. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz, wrote afterward about the psychological interior of that experience, about men sharing their last piece of bread with someone in worse condition. Not because it was strategic. It wasn't. Because it was human. Because maintaining your humanity inside a system designed to reduce you to a number was itself an act of defiance. People held concerts in the camps, told jokes, celebrated Shabbat with whatever fragments were available, marked birthdays, told stories. Humans are strange this way. Strip everything away and we start celebrating the most ordinary things. A good meal becomes an event. A safe night becomes a victory. A shared laugh becomes something worth remembering for 50 years. The children who vanished into plain sight. One of the most remarkable survival stories of the entire war involves children who survived by disappearing into ordinary life. Thousands of Jewish children were smuggled out of ghettos, given false names, placed with non-Jewish families, hidden in convents, and raised in plain sight as someone else entirely. Raised Catholic, raised Polish, raised as children with entirely fictional histories and entirely real lives ahead of them. Irina Sendler was a Polish social worker who organized the smuggling of approximately 2,500 children out of the Warsaw Ghetto. She hid them in toolboxes, burlap sacks, under the floors of ambulances, in the back of vehicles with false compartments. She kept records of every child's real name written on thin paper, sealed in jars, buried in a garden, so that after the war, children might find their way back to surviving family members. She was eventually caught by the Gestapo, tortured. Her legs and feet were broken. She did not give up a single name. She survived the war. She dug up her jars. She spent the following years trying to reunite families. She was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. She lost to Al Gore for the climate slideshow. History has some opinions about that. What actually made the difference? Across all these stories, the false papers, the forest communities, the hidden children, the diplomat writing visas from a moving train, certain things come up again and again. Community. Almost nobody survived entirely alone. They survived because someone helped. A neighbor, a stranger, someone who decided that complicity was worse than risk. Adaptability. The situation changed constantly and without warning. What worked in 1940 didn't work in 1942. Survivors adapted faster than the circumstances changed. They reinvented themselves repeatedly, without complaint, because complaint was a luxury the situation didn't offer. Routine. Boring, ordinary, unremarkable routine. Wake up, eat, clean, talk, sleep, repeat. Tiny structures of normality inside chaos. Humans need routine the way houses need foundations. Remove it and everything tilts. Humor. Yes, humor. Survivors consistently describe jokes told in terrible conditions. Dark humor. Absurdist humor. The humor of people who have looked at an impossible situation and decided that laughing at it is at least something. Humor is not a distraction from suffering. Sometimes it's the proof that suffering hasn't won completely. Audacity. A frankly unreasonable amount of nerve. The people who bluffed through checkpoints, who smiled at officers while hiding people in their basements, who wrote illegal visas by hand until the train left the station, who built villages in forests and dared anyone to come find them. Luck. Let's be completely honest. Luck played an enormous role. Survival was not always a matter of being cleverer or braver than those who didn't make it. Sometimes it was which train, which guard, which day liberation arrived. Acknowledging luck isn't diminishing the courage, it's respecting the truth. Why it still matters. The Holocaust is taught as a record of what humans are capable of at their absolute worst. That record is accurate and must be preserved. But running alongside that record, often overlooked, is a different record entirely. A record of a diplomat writing until his hand stops working. 3 brothers building a civilization in a forest. A social worker burying names in jars. Farmers opening barns. Neighbors sharing bread. Priests creating false records. Strangers choosing risk over safety because they couldn't look themselves in the mirror if they didn't. The Nazis built a machine designed to make human connection impossible. People connected anyway. Designed to make hope unsustainable. People sustained it anyway. Designed to reduce human beings to administrative problems requiring industrial solutions. People remained, stubbornly and completely, human anyway. That refusal, to stop being human, to stop helping each other, to stop finding things worth a joke or a prayer or a shared piece of bread, turned out to be the one thing the machine couldn't fully process. Adaptation, community, nerve, humor, hope, not superpowers, just people. Ordinary, frightened, exhausted, determined people who decided that one more day was possible, then found another one after that.